Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Let me start my statement and question by thanking you. You've been under a lot of heat for your leadership on this issue for a long, long time. And the fact that we have endured so many tragedies, Newtown being the most recent, is an indication that your early inclination toward restricting and regulating the use of these weapons was certainly necessary to keep America safe. I'm glad you've continued in that effort. Let me address, Mr. Walsh, for a moment some questions from Senator Grassley, because we did have a hearing before the Constitution Subcommittee. It is clear in the Heller decision and Heller 2 that what the court found to be the core lawful purpose of the Second Amendment was individual self-defense. So restrictions in Heller 2 on high-capacity magazines and assault weapons, the Court of Appeals held, do not effectively disarm individuals or substantially affect their ability to defend themselves. The Second Amendment, like the First Amendment, does not prevent lawmakers from enacting reasonable regulations that do not seriously interfere with the core right guaranteed by the Constitution. So it comes to this point, Mr. Walsh. That man stood in that theater in Aurora, Colorado, with a magazine with a capacity of 100 rounds, using this assault-style weapon to try to kill as many people as possible. Fortunately, it jammed, as I understand it, which stopped him from his evil purpose, at least in its entirety. So I guess the question which Senator Grassley raises is whether or not there is a constitutionally protected right under the Second Amendment for someone to own and use a gun with that capacity to kill. What is your conclusion?
Well, Senator, if I may, I think one of the things that the department has been very careful about in crafting proposals on this subject is to ensure that we are taking into account really the seminal decisions in Heller and McDonald by the Supreme Court, finding that the Second Amendment is in fact an individual right. But in addressing those two cases and looking at the scope of the protections afforded by the Second Amendment, there clearly is room for reasonable regulation, particularly of dangerous and unusual weapons. And I think it's fair to say that the department believes strongly that limitations on high-capacity magazines, anything in the department's position is anything over 10 rounds, it would be constitutional based on that analysis.
So let me ask you the second part of this. We have gone through tragedy after tragedy in the city of Chicago with gun violence. And I have met with so many families. I mean, I cannot tell you how many who have lost innocent children to gun violence. The Hydea Pendleton family being the most recent. But there have been some since. It just continues. And it really troubles me. In fact, it angers me when these are dismissed as a failure of law enforcement. The argument's been made even in this hearing. There are adequate laws on the books. Well, why don't you just enforce the laws? These things wouldn't happen. Take, for example, the issue of straw purchasing. How many federal prosecutions there were of alleged straw purchasers really misses the point. How many prosecutions were there, both state, local, and federal? And it turns out that in many instances, federal prosecutors are turning to state prosecutors and saying, you have a better chance to convict at a state level with a more meaningful penalty. So let me bring that right home to you, the U.S. Attorney's Office. When you were faced with a potential prosecution for an obvious straw purchasers, what calculations go through your mind about whether to pursue that prosecution?
Well, Senator, if I may, I would like to emphasize something that you commented on a moment ago, and that is our work has to be in close cooperation with state and local police and state and local prosecutors as well. We really need to work as a team. We have to come at the gun violence problem as a combined group. And that gives us opportunities in many circumstances to choose, in cooperation with a state district attorney and a U.S. attorney, to decide where the charges are best brought and where the highest likelihood of a conviction and a meaningful sentence may be found. So, for example, in the spring of 2011, in Aurora, by coincidence, there were a spate of officer-involved shootings. And there was great concern in Colorado and in the Denver metropolitan area that we were about to embark on a summer of violence, so to speak. So in conjunction with Chief Oates of Aurora, Chief White in Denver, and other chiefs in the metropolitan area, we convened a group of law enforcement, state, federal law enforcement folks, ATF included, and did a summer initiative aimed at aggressively and proactively reaching out and arresting felons and other criminals who were either attempting to get guns or actually buying them. At the end of that effort, over the course of the summer, there were a total of 85 criminal prosecutions and convictions, and they were a mix. The majority were federal prosecutions, but there were a substantial number that we took stateside, so to speak, because that was the most effective way to approach the case in a particular area. So to go to your question about trafficking, part of the difficulty that we have, and part of the reason that we have asked the committee to consider, and the president has proposed a stronger gun trafficking law, is that currently we are basically trying to prosecute those cases under a false statement theory. It's 18 U.S. Code 922A6. Those cases are difficult, and many times a judge or a jury may see that kind of a prosecution as more of a paperwork violation rather than something that really implicates public safety. Unfortunately, for those reasons, we need to assess, and the line prosecutors, the career prosecutors who are making these decisions, often say we need to find some other way to take this particular bad actor off the street.
Let me just say, in conclusion, Madam Chair, yours is the second testimony under oath within the last several weeks that has said exactly the same thing, that this is a shared responsibility of prosecution. And I wish those who were criticizing what is going on in many states and jurisdictions across the country would at least take notice of the fact that there is prosecution efforts underway that are not assisted by the fact that many of our laws at the federal level are just too weak when it comes to this subject. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.